2 million years ago, before language, before weapons, before fire, there was survival. And in a forgotten land, where wind scraped skin like bone, one man walked alone. His name was Tharn. And this is how his legend began. The wind howled like a living creature, dragging clouds of dust across the cold earth. Bare trees clawed at the sky, and far in the distance, mammoths moved slowly through a gray mist, mountains of muscle covered in hair, on the edge of a dead forest. A man crouched low behind a boulder. His breath came out in white bursts. Name was Tharn. He had no language to say it, no voice to speak it aloud, but it was there, buried deep in his bones. He knew who he was, and he knew he was hungry. Tharn's skin was cracked from wind, his shoulders draped in stitched hides. Shook under the weight of cold. His people were gone, scattered, maybe dead. Though winter had come early this cycle, the animals had moved on, the old rivers had dried. He was alone. His feet were wrapped in bark and fur, tied with dried sinew. Every step hurt. But still, he moved. He had to. That morning he had followed the tracks of a wild boar, faint in the frozen mud. But now, the scent had vanished, stolen by the wind. He licked the inside of his mouth, dry as bone. Then a sound, not a roar, not a cry. Grown long and low, he turned his head slowly. Something moved in the trees beyond, a shape too tall for a man, too smooth for a beast. He froze, but the shape didn't come closer. It turned, disappeared. His heart pounded. His hand gripped the crude spear he'd fashioned from a long branch and a broken tooth. It wouldn't stop a direwolf or a cave lion, but it might delay death for one breath longer. Tharn waited for silence to return, and when it did, he crept forward away from the rocks, through the stiff weeds and frost-tipped grass. Hours passed. The sun never came. Only the dull gray light of a world that had forgotten warmth. Finally, he found it. A clearing, dead still. In the center, a body lay curled beside a gutted fire pit. It was not an animal. It was a man. Tharn approached slowly, the way a cat might approach a snake. The man's eyes were open, but dry and glassy. His lips were split from cold. Around his neck hung a string of carved stones, symbols etched with lines and circles. This was no wanderer. This was a seer, one of the old ones. The man had died sitting up, his hands still resting on his knees. His body smelled only faintly of death, which meant he hadn't been here long. Tharn reached for the stones. They were warm, still holding memory. Spiral drawn into the wall pulsed like a heartbeat. In the center, a figure stood tall, with antlers of bone and hair like woven reeds. Instead, he sat and waited. That night, he dreamt of a cave lit by light without fire. It said nothing. But when he woke, he knew where to go. With the dawn came a thin trail of bird calls. A good sign. If the birds were alive, the predators weren't hunting here. Tharn followed the memory of his dream, a mental map made not of logic, but of something older. Instinct. These were old trees, sacred to his people. His mother once told him they only grew near places the world wanted to keep hidden. He walked past a line of trees blackened by lightning. By midday, the sky began to shift. The color turned pale green, a rare warning in the Stone Age. Even Tharn, who had no word for storm, knew this meant danger. But he had already passed the point of turning back. He moved forward. The rocks were cut clean, as if by giants. No animals moved here. No sounds. Just the occasional whisper of wind between sharp cliffs. The land sloped downward, steep and slick. Canyon opened before him. At the bottom of the canyon, Tharn found something impossible. A footprint, but not human, and not beast. 3 toes, long, almost reptilian, embedded in stone like it had been there for ages. Tharn's breath stopped. He dropped to one knee, touched it. Still dry, still real. The flames licked at the sky like a tongue of the gods. Something had been here, something ancient. For the first time in his life, Tharn saw fire. He followed the canyon into dusk. And then, without warning, the sky split. Lightning shattered the silence, and struck a tall tree just meters ahead. A real, raging, golden-red thing that hissed and danced with power. He staggered back. The heat was alive. The shadows it cast looked like demons, not out of bravery, but because something inside him had changed. But then, within the fire, just for a second, he saw eyes. Not human, not beast. Watching, and then gone. The tree burned into the night. Tharn stayed. He didn't run from the flame. He sat beside it, let it speak. The storm had passed, but its memory clung to the land. Snow draped the trees like burial shrouds, and the wind still howled between the mountains like a grieving spirit. Tharn had survived, but the night had marked him. His breath was shallow. Hunger gnawed at his belly like a wolf. But what drove him wasn't food. It was the voice. Now fire walked with him. Like a memory older than language, few had dared to approach it. The elders called it the Cave of Whispers. They said the dead lived there, and those who entered never returned. But Tharn was no longer afraid of the stories of old men. He had faced the ice, the wind, and death. He had seen the fire fall from the sky. His feet crunched in the deep snow as he followed a narrow ridge, clutching the burning branch like it was the hand of the gods themselves. He had heard it again at dawn, a distant chant, carried by the wind. It wasn't in any tongue he knew, but it pulled at something deep inside him, and it came from the cave. The cave sat high above the valley, carved into the bone of the mountain. He climbed, a chant, rhythmic and endless. His hands bled on jagged rocks. His knees scraped raw. Bones lay scattered across a tanimal. Human, it was hard to tell. Above it hung a massive symbol etched into the ceiling. A burning eye, weeping tears that looked like fire. Strange markings scarred the rock spirals, stick figures, and sunbursts. One symbol, a circle surrounded by lines, glowed faintly in the fire's light. Tharn touched it. It was warm. It wore robes of fur and bark, and it held a staff carved from mammoth bone. But he pressed on, gripping the fire with one hand, clawing at the cliff with the other. The snow fell in slow, silent sheets. Below, the forest waited, dark and vast. His firelight danced across walls covered in strange paintings, beasts with many horns, men with glowing hands, great birds devouring the sun. Above, the mouth of the cave yawned like a beast waiting to swallow him whole. What you seek is meaning. The walls shimmered with moisture, and the air was thick with ancient dust, smelled of stone and bone and old things forgotten. Finally, he reached the edge. With a gesture, it cleared the bones. Beneath them was a map carved into the rock itself. It showed mountains, rivers, paths, but at its center was something strange. A massive tree made of fire. The entrance was narrow but deep, like a wound in the mountain. Beyond the ice teeth, beyond the beast lands, but you must go. The gods set it ablaze. When the world was new, its roots feed the earth, and its flames feed the soul. Those who reach it change. The clans fight over bones, but fire can change everything. He ducked into the cave, dragging the fire behind him, a tiny stone pulsing with light. As he moved deeper, the air grew warmer. As he turned to leave, the whispers grew louder. Angry now, hungry then. The whispers began. He leaped over crevices, dodged falling stones. The shadows chased him, clawing at his heels. They were soft at first, like the wind brushing leaves, but they grew louder with each step. Words he did not understand, names he had never heard. He rounded a corner and stopped. There, in the center of the cavern, was a massive stone table, and at the far end of the room stood a figure. It was human, at least Tharn thought so, but its skin was pale as moonlight, and its hair was white and long. The pale one turned slowly. Its eyes were milky and blind, but it looked directly at Tharn. "You have come," it whispered, in a voice that echoed like water dripping in a cave. "The fire has chosen you." Tharn stepped back. "Who are you?" "I am the memory of your people. The last flame of what came before. You seek fire, but you carry it already." Tharn didn't understand, but he felt the truth of the words. "The world is dying," the pale one continued. "The sky grows colder. The beasts wander away." Tharn raised his burning branch. "Show me." The Pale One nodded and walked to the stone table. "The flame tree," the Pale One said. "The first fire? Where is it, Far?" "Why me?" "Because you are not broken yet." Suddenly the ground shook. A rumble echoed through the cave, and dust rained from the ceiling. "They come," the Pale One whispered. "The Shadow Eaters. They hunt the fire, and let them come," Tharn growled, gripping his fire tighter. "No, you must leave. Take the map. Take the ember." The Pale One reached into the fire pit and pulled something glowing from beneath the ashes. "Place this in the fire when it dies. It will live again." Tharn took the ember and the map. Dark shapes slithered from the cracks in the wall, shadows with teeth, crawling like spiders. The Pale One raised its staff and shouted a word that shook the cave. "Run!" it cried. Tharn bolted, sprinting through the tunnels as the walls groaned. At the entrance, the cave shuddered one last time and collapsed behind him. Silence. Only the wind now. He looked down at the ember in his hand. It pulsed like a heartbeat. He looked up at the stars. The journey had begun. The morning sky was painted in ash and silver as Tharn pushed forward through the tangled forest. His arms ached from hauling himself up ridges. Cuts lined his legs. Had not eaten in 2 days, and yet something stronger than hunger drove him the memory of what the Pale One had shown him. The flames carved into the cave wall had revealed a path, not just across the land, but into something older than time. A path to the River of Bones. Some believed it cursed. Others believed it was where fire first touched man. Tharn didn't know what to believe, but he knew he had no choice. From above, it looked like a wound in the earth. The Pale One had told him the fire's origin lay beyond that cursed place. He heard the Old Ones whisper of it, where the earth cracked wide and bones of beasts and men lay together, tangled in death. After days of walking, Tharn came to the edge of a deep ravine. Fog pooled at the bottom, thick and yellow. Hanging from its brittle branches were bones small, one strung with vines and beads, a warning or a welcome. A dead tree stood crooked at the edge. Tharn grabbed a thick vine and began his descent. The earth groaned beneath his weight. His fingers bled as he slid down into darkness. But he didn't stop. When he reached the bottom, the air changed. It was cold, damp, and full of something ancient. And then he saw them bones. Thousands of them. Lining the ground, wedged between rocks, hanging from roots. Skulls with shattered jaws, rib cages still wrapped in faded cloth. Old weapons pierced through sternums. Burn marks. All of them had burn marks. Her eyes were hollow, and her mouth never moved, but he heard her voice in his head. This wasn't a battlefield. This was a mass grave. Tharn crouched, running his hand across a smooth femur. He remembered what the Pale One said. The first fire did not come from the sky. It came from sacrifice. Was this it? Were these the ones who first touched the flame? As he pressed forward, shapes began to form in the mist. Not shadows, figures. As if the very fire he sought had been taken from them. At first he thought they were memories, hallucinations from hunger. But then one stepped forward. It was a woman. Or had once been. Her skin was thin, almost translucent. Her bones glowed faintly beneath the surface. "Why do you walk the bone path?" Tharn froze, his breath visible in the cold air. "I seek the fire. To save my people." The figure tilted her head. "Would you take what cost us everything?" And from within the flames a single figure walked forward, carrying the fire in their hands like a gift and a curse. More shapes gathered. Men, women, even children. All watching. Waiting. Tharn's chest tightened. He could feel the weight of their gaze, not just anger, but pain. "I will not steal," Tharn said. "Only learn." Silence. "Fire destroys. It does not care, but you must." Then the woman stepped aside. The mist parted, revealing an ancient structure at the heart of the riverbed. A stone archway covered in vines and bone charms. At its center, a symbol, the flame eye. As Tharn passed beneath the arch, the earth trembled. He dropped to one knee, his head pulsed with pressure, his vision blurred, and then he was somewhere else. Fire roared across the land. A great beast, made of smoke and ash, devoured forests and screamed across the skies. Villages burned, children wept. Tharn realized this wasn't the first time man found fire. It was the first time they used it for war. The Pale One's words returned. Fire saves. When the vision ended, Tharn lay gasping beside the arch. The bone figures were gone. The mist had cleared. In his palm, something warm pulsed, stone small, blackened, glowing faintly from within. The first ember. The gift of those who had burned. Tharn rose to his feet. He did not yet understand all he had seen, but he knew the journey was far from over. He tucked the ember deep into his pouch, pulled his fur tight, and set his eyes on the mountain beyond. Ahead lay ice, storm, and creatures untouched by man. But behind him, the river of bones lay silent once more. The winds blew colder that morning. Tharn awoke to a strange silence, the kind that presses into the bones. The forest around him, once loud with the chatter of birds and the rustling of beasts, was quiet. Mist clung low to the ground, curling around his legs like pale snakes. Somewhere in the distance, water trickled over stone, but the sound didn't calm him to quiet. But this was different. Today, it felt closer, hungrier. He stepped carefully through the underbrush, his bare feet hardened from weeks of travel. Not today. He wasn't alone in this forest. He dropped low and crawled in, pressing his body against the cool earth. The mist thickened, and then he heard it. Tharn had felt the presence before. Eyes that watched from behind trees, breaths drawn just beyond sight. He climbed a ridge of black stone, sharp and brittle underfoot. And from there he saw it. Massive footprints pressed into the mud below. A slow exhale through something jagged, broken nostrils or torn lungs. It moved just beyond the log, a massive silhouette shifting between trees. It sniffed the air, and then it roared. Each longer than his arm, the toe marks wide and clawed. A predator, one he didn't recognize. His heart pounded. He didn't have fire. He didn't have a weapon. All he had was instinct. And the forest. Tharn backed away slowly, scanning the terrain. There, a fallen tree, hollow inside. Breathing, not his own. The mist began to lift. And Tharn, shaking, crawled from the log, bloodied but alive. Heavy, wet. A sound unlike anything Tharn had heard. Part scream, part thunder, and all of it death. The log shook. Tharn gripped the bark so tightly his hands bled, but he didn't move. Not an inch. The beast lingered, sniffed again. Then silence. A thing not meant to be seen, not meant to be understood. Long minutes passed, but something had changed. For the first time, he knew fear not just of survival, but of something older than man. Tharn had survived, but the forest had spoken. And it had a name now, the place of the beast. 3 days passed. Tharn stayed near the river's bend, gathering roots and small game. Didn't speak. Not that he had words, but in his eyes was a new sharpness. Every shadow was suspect, every sound a threat. He'd begun to paint the stones. With crushed berries and clay, he marked the cave walls with crude symbols. The beast's massive feet, the trees, the mist, and his own small shape hiding beneath it all. It wasn't art, it was warning. One night the wind changed again, came hot. Strange for the season. The trees groaned as if bracing, and the sky glowed. Tharn climbed a ridge and looked up, lit the night like dawn. Then boom. A streak of orange blazed across the heavens, fast and furious, tearing a path through the stars. Trees bent, birds screamed, smooth, shining, almost alive. Tharn reached for it, and then darkness. The earth shook, second sun exploded on the horizon. Tharn ducked, shielding his face. A gust of hot wind knocked him backward. It wasn't until morning that he found it. A blackened crater, steaming and cracked, in its center stone, but not like any he had seen. It burned, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he lifted the strange rock, obsidian, though he didn't know the word, and carried it back to his cave. That night, he struck it against another stone. Once, twice. A spark. His eyes widened. He struck again. Spark landed on dry moss. It glowed, then flames. Fire. Tharn staggered back, eyes full of tears. But he didn't run. He sat. He watched. And for the first time in his life, he felt something new. Not hunger, not fear. Power. Fire. Born from the sky. Now in his hands. The beast in the forest would never own him again. The flames danced in the cave. Tharn sat close to them, knees drawn to his chest, the obsidian rock resting beside him like a treasure. His dark eyes shimmered in the flickering light. He had done something no one had. Stolen fire from the sky and made it live. But power brings attention. And something was watching. On the 5th day after fire, Tharn awoke to sounds. Not beasts, but voices. Low, strange sounds like grunts and short calls. Not animals. Not the wind. Humans. He crept to the edge of his cave. Bones hung from their necks. Their hair was wild, tangled with feathers. They moved like shadows. Careful. His memories of people were shadows. A scream, running feet. But something in him stirred now. Curiosity. Fear. Hope. Cautious. Down below near the river bend were figures. 5 of them, 2 tall, 3 shorter. Their bodies painted in ash and red clay. He grunted orders, pointing toward Tharn's cave. Tharn's heart raced. He had not seen another of his kind in many cycles of the moon. They didn't see him, not yet. They smelled something, smoke. The group followed the scent, up the rocks. 1 man in front, older with a long scar across his chest. Tharn backed away, fast. He touched his chest and said, "Tharn." He grabbed the obsidian stone and crouched low, hands shaking. The fire still burned. Would they take it, hurt him? He was ready to fight. But then they entered. Silence respected him. Brog offered a carved spear in trade. Ka brought roots and berries. Another man showed Tharn how to trap fish. He stared at the fire, then dropped to his knees. The others followed. I died. Amazed. Terrified. The scarred man stepped forward. Tharn looked at them, unsure. They watched. No reply. Then, the youngest of the group, a girl no older than 10 winters, stepped forward. She mimicked him, touched her chest and said, "Ka." The scarred man grunted, "Brog." And just like that, names were exchanged one by one. Something ancient stirred. Not just survival, connection. That night they shared the fire. They didn't speak much. They watched Tharn. And for the first time in moons, Tharn laughed. But the bond came at a price. As the fire grew, so did the danger. The beast from the forest, the one Tharn thought gone, was not. It had followed the scent too. That night, as the tribe slept, Tharn awoke to a distant roar, deep, echoing, familiar. The beast was near, but Tharn was not alone anymore. And neither was the fire. He gripped the obsidian stone, held it high, and whispered in a voice still raw from silence. "We burn." The night was silent. Too silent, tribe of ash and bone. Once nomads of fear now sat under Tharn's fire, like children under the stars. Sparks rose to the sky like glowing insects. They ate roots and roasted fish, drew shapes in the dirt with a stick. Brog sharpened his spear, always watching the darkness beyond, and Tharn. Tharn felt something new, belonging. Yet beneath that warmth, an old presence stirred. The beast. The same one that stalked Tharn when he was alone. The shadow that haunted the forest. The monster that whispered through the trees. It had found him again. But this time, he wasn't alone. That night, Ka didn't sleep. She saw it first. Eyes, glowing like embers. In the trees, it didn't growl. It didn't move. It watched. She froze. Then a crack. A low snarl. Ka screamed. The camp jolted awake. Tharn leaped to his feet, grabbing the obsidian stone now tied to a stick like a blade. Brog shouted to the others, forming a circle around the fire, spears out, eyes scanning. Then it came. Not a beast. A force. It crashed through the trees like thunder, massive, covered in thick fur and deep scars. Its teeth were longer than Tharn's hand. Its breath came out like steam. and in its eyes, hunger. Not for food, for fire. It remembered Tharn, the fire-bearer. The man screamed, and Ka pulled him back into the circle. The thief. With a scream that shook the bones of every living soul, the beast lunged. Brog attacked first, jabbing with his spear. But the creature swatted him aside like dry grass. Two men tried to flank it. One was too slow. The beast caught his leg. Tharn held his weapon tight. His hands trembled, but he stepped forward, toward the thing he once ran from. It saw him, and paused. The circle of flame grew. The beast writhed and backed away. Recognition, then rage. He shouted to the tribe, "Fire, hold it!" It charged, waited. And just before it reached him, he turned, ran straight toward the fire, and grabbed the burning end of a branch. He spun, and slammed the fire into the beast's face. A scream tore through the night. The beast staggered. Fire. It feared fire. The beast stood before it, raising its claw to strike the embers. Tharn didn't stop. He grabbed branches, lit them, but then it ran. It roared, turned, and swiped, cutting across Tharn's chest, not away, into the cave, where the fire was born, and the flames inside were dying. Tharn's eyes went wide. If it killed the fire, they would lose everything. He ran in after it. Alone, the cave was narrow, dark, hot. He heard the growls echo. He saw the flickering flame ahead. Tharn didn't think, screamed and charged. His blade struck the creature's back. He fell, blood poured. But beside him, embers still glowed. He reached, scooped one into dry grass, blew. Spark of flame. The beast moved closer. Tharn lit the branch. Fire roared once more. He held it up, eyes locked with the creature's. It growled. Then slowly, step by step, backed away. Out of the cave, gone, Tharn collapsed. Morning came. Ka and Brog found him by the fire. Wounded but alive, they lifted him gently, wrapped his chest, sat with him in silence, and in their eyes, no longer fear, but reverence. That night, the tribe danced around the fire. A new fire. Stronger, Tharn's fire. They painted the walls of the cave with symbols. A great beast, a man with flame, circles, lines, a legend. The fire had not just saved them, it had united them. And deep within, Tharn felt it. He was no longer just surviving. He was becoming something more. The rains had come. But for the first time, they did not bring fear. The cave of fire had become a home. The walls glowed warm, the tribe of ash and bone, once scattered, once broken, now sat as one, listening to the thunder outside and the crackle of fire within. But Tharn sat alone, not because of silence, but because of the symbols, painted in ash and red clay on the stone walls, symbols that danced in torchlight like they were alive. Tharn stared at them night after night. A spiral, a jagged line, 3 dots, a handprint. It was Ka who noticed first. "These are not just pictures," she said. "They are messages." Tharn turned to her. Messages for who? She didn't answer, because deep down she knew the truth. The stones were speaking to the future, the fire, the movement of animals. He began to see patterns, and the one to understand them was Tharn. Days passed. Tharn became obsessed. He traced the lines with charcoal, copied them onto bark and stone. He watched the stars. When birds circled high, the symbol for watch appeared. When the rivers flooded, the spiral deepened. Every symbol had a meaning, not just for survival, but for memory. He cleared it with his hands, crawling inside. One night, Brog laughed. "You waste your time with ghosts." But Ka disagreed. "The stars, the animals, but maybe now the earth follows you," she told Tharn. "We've always followed the earth." Then something changed. Tharn found a cave beyond the trees, half buried by mud and time. What he found stunned him, more symbols. But these were old, older than fire, carved deep into the walls with bones and stone. Then it means, "Your story was written before you were born, but some were the same spiral, same jagged line, and among them, a figure, man with flame in his hand, angry. What we leave behind is more than meat and bone. Fire is strength, he growled one night, but this is madness. You stare at rocks while the wild hunts us. Tharn stepped back. This was drawn before me, he whispered. Ka touched the wall. Word spread through the tribe. The cave became sacred, to remember. Children left their handprints. Elders drew the sun and the storms. Others came to paint. But only Tharn understood what it meant. They were not just surviving, they were beginning history. But not everyone was ready. Brog grew distant. Tharn stood tall. Brog spat on the floor. That night, he disappeared into the forest. 3 days later, he returned, wounded, bleeding, his eyes wide with fear. They came. From the other side of the ridge, he said, faces painted with ash. They have no fire, only stone clubs. They saw my torch and called it sorcery. Ka's voice trembled. Did they follow you? Brog nodded. Tharn looked toward the cave wall, to the man with fire in his hand. A prophecy, are coming, he whispered. Not beasts, but people. That night, Tharn gathered the tribe. He did not speak of war, he spoke of memory. If we fall, the forest forgets, but the stones, they remember, their name, their mark. Their moment, he told each person to paint. It wasn't for them, it was for who came next. Children painted their hands. Mothers drew circles for their children. Brog stood silent, then carved a spear. Even he understood. When the strangers came, they did not understand fire. They shouted, screamed, but they saw the cave, saw the symbols, and they froze. Because deep inside, some part of them recognized it. The tribe stood behind Tharn. No war, no running, just fire and stories on stone. The strangers backed away and were gone. Peace. For now, but Tharn knew. The world was changing. Fire had given them safety. Symbols had given them memory. But what came next would be language, and with it, power. The cold came early that season. The winds blew harder. The fire struggled to stay lit. Even the stars seemed to hide behind thick clouds. But inside the cave, something new was stirring. Not fear. Not silence, but sound. Tharn sat by the fire with Ka, watching the children huddle in the warmth. One boy, Raku, was humming, soft repeating sound. At first Tharn thought it was nonsense, but Ka smiled. He sings what he remembers, she said. He hums what he saw. Tharn looked closer. The boy's rhythm matched the night Ka returned from the hunt. A leap, a fall, a cry of triumph. The sound was a story. That night, Tharn stayed awake, listening. The crack of fire, the whistle of wind. The beat of Ka's hand as she ground seeds against the rock. Rhythm, pattern, meaning, just like the symbols. But faster. Alive. It hit him like lightning. They could speak without walls. Tharn began to experiment, first with grunts. Different for hunger, for water, for fear. Then with hums, whistles, claps. Each one tied to a feeling, a memory, an action. At first, the tribe laughed. Then they listened. He taught Ka first. Low hum for stay. A sharp click for danger. A whistle that meant food. They hunted more icily, warned more quickly, moved more silently. When the winds howled, they used clicks instead of words. The forest no longer swallowed their voices. The cave became a school of sound. Elders began to repeat the noises. Children turned them into games. Ka used tone to tell stories, adding upward pitch to mean joy, downward hums for sorrow. Even Brog, the stubborn warrior, grunted with meaning now. They were not just making noise, they were speaking. One evening, Ka gathered the tribe. She spoke a full story, with nothing but sound and motion. The tale of how she met Tharn, how the beast had almost taken her life, how the fire saved her. When she finished, there was silence, then claps, tears, smiles, no drawings, no symbols, just voice. The first storyteller had been born, but not everyone was ready. An old woman named Etha, the memory keeper, said, Words that vanish cannot be trusted. She pointed to the cave wall. These remain, she said. Words disappear. Tharn did not argue, simply spoke a new word that night, memory, and looked into her eyes. It was enough. But trouble brewed beyond the firelight. Other tribes had heard the strange sounds carried by the wind. They called them sky ghosts. They feared the voices of the ash and bone people. And once again, strangers came. But this time, not with weapons. With curiosity. 3 hunters from a far-off ridge entered the valley. They watched in silence, then mimicked Tharn's whistle. Perfectly. A bridge had been formed, not with stone, not with blood, but with sound. Weeks passed. The cave was no longer a home. It was a gathering place. Tribes came and left. They brought meat, tools, fire. In exchange, they learned sounds, names, gestures, stories. And Tharn, he stood among them, not as a leader of war, but as the first teacher. Ka came to him one night. You gave them fire once, she whispered. Now you've given them voice. Tharn stared at the sky, the stars blinking overhead. He whispered a word he had not spoken before. Future. And deep inside the cave, on the same wall where once symbols danced, a child wrote something new. It's not a spiral, not a handprint, but something curved, repetitive, a shape born from sound. The first letter, the first seed of writing. Language had begun. Not just for survival, but for connection, for memory, for civilization. And in the heart of it all stood Tharn, the man of silence, became the voice of fire. The winds had changed. It's no longer wild and untamed. Now they carried messages, songs, warnings, laughter, across valleys. Over rivers, through caves and forests, the sounds spread. Words once unknown now had power. They could calm a child, command a hunt, warn of danger, welcome strangers, and behind it all was Tharn. He stood older now. Lines marked his face, carved by wind and wisdom. His tribe had grown, no longer just the ash and bone. Now people came from the smoke mountains, the long teeth plains, the deep ice caverns. They came with questions, with dreams, and most of all, with ears. They called him the fire speaker. It's the one who made noise into meaning. But Tharn did not speak often anymore. Others did. Now a mother of 2, told stories by firelight that made warriors weep. Brog, once the fiercest fighter, taught children the sounds of birds and beasts, warning of storms before they struck. The cave had become a school, a cradle of civilization. One night, a stranger arrived. He wore a cloak of white furs, ice that seemed to see too much, and around his neck symbols carved into stone. He spoke a language none understood, but his gestures were familiar, his smile kind. And when Tharn approached, the stranger bowed. Then he mimicked Tharn's sound for welcome. Perfectly, the world, it seemed, had heard him, not just in the valley, but far beyond. Tribes who had never met now shared words. A hunter from the sunburnt south greeted a fisherman from the frozen north. They could speak, they could remember, they could dream. But change brings fear. Some elders warned, we lose the old ways. They wanted silence again. Only symbols, only stories whispered in secret, not this explosion of sound, not this new world of noise. One leader, Urok, demanded Tharn stop. This speaking, it is magic. It will bring chaos. Tharn said nothing at first. Then he whispered a word. Time. Urok frowned. What is that? And Tharn replied, it's the space between one fire and the next. There was no war, no rebellion, just silence. Then, understanding. The old gave way. The new held gently. Just as fire had once frightened, then warmed, so did speech. In the final days of his life, Tharn climbed the highest hill near the valley. From there, he saw smoke rising in dozens of places. Not from battle, from campfires. He heard distant echoes of whistles, songs, and laughter.
Ass!
The world once silent now sang. He closed his eyes. Ka found him hours later, seated in peace, face toward the stars, a soft smile on his lips. In his hand, a stone with markings carved in patterns. Not symbols of fear or food, but the first attempt at script, The legend of Tharn spread, told by the Ashen Bone, then by the Mountain Clan, then by those who had never seen the cave, but whispered the name like a sacred thing. Tharn, the fire speaker, the one who gave us sound. Thousands of years passed. Caves turned to huts, huts to villages, villages to cities. And deep in a hidden valley, forgotten by maps but remembered by wind, a child touched an old wall. There barely visible were symbols, a spiral, a handprint, and beneath them, a name: Tharn, the man who spoke to tomorrow.